My name is Emily Rapp. I've been involved in the chapter since my 22-year-old son was diagnosed at age 10. And so I got involved in a lot of fundraisers. I have served as the president of the chapter, and I am involved still in leadership giving. If anyone is interested in making a leadership gift, see me after. And my motivation is not only my son Turner, who has type 1 diabetes, but also another of my children, my son William, who is in a clinical trial because he has the antibodies. So I can talk to you about what that means as well. And my husband similarly got very involved with JDRF when our son was diagnosed, and through a different route, he became involved at the national level, and one thing led to another, and now he is the CEO of JDRF International. And so we are all in as a family, and I therefore have a whole lot of table talk involving research and JDRF and what the mission is. And I just love to share it with all of you. You've had a long day. You may have more questions than answers, but I know I've been coming to this for 11 years, and I feel like I learn something new every single time, so I hope that you have found some good and useful information. The other thing I have found with JDRF is it's a club no one wants to join, but there are a lot of nice people in it, and I think you'll find your connections that you make here. You will see people at other events, and it's fun to talk to them. It's fun to share, tips and tricks, and just I know a whole lot of people that enrich my life that I wouldn't know if it weren't for JDRF. So it's a little side perk. This is a long slide and a long series of slides, and I'm not going to talk about all of them, so I'll be whipping through some. I want to make sure that you have a good idea of what JDRF is all about and how hard JDRF is working to turn type 1 into type none. That's the main message here. We all know that that's been talked for a long time. On the way, JDRF is working to make having type 1 diabetes be less complicated, less burdensome, less invasive, and less dangerous for people who have type 1 and for the families who love them. A whole lot of people have type 1. All right, let's talk about the pipeline, because JDRF has a specific plan for making things easier until there's a cure, less until none, until there's type none. This pipeline, it shows sort of all the different things that are going on, and JDRF works to have things going on at every level of type 1 research. And let me step back and say, for those of you who don't know me, I have a lot of family with type 1 diabetes. My parents don't have type 1 diabetes. None of my siblings have type 1 diabetes. None of my nieces and nephews have type 1 diabetes. But I have a great aunt who has it. I have a great uncle who has it. 2 of his kids have it. Another cousin's child has it. So I can't deny that it's a family problem. There are also other autoimmune diseases somewhat in our family, and I think most families with type 1 find that they have other autoimmune diseases somewhere in their family tree. One area of research is looking at if we can intervene early enough and stop some kind of immune going haywire process. Can we actually benefit not just people with type 1, but people with all these different issues? So when our son was diagnosed at age 10, 11 years ago, of course I was devastated, and I particularly referenced my cousins who, when we were little, their life revolved around 2 shots a day. They could only eat at certain times. It just seemed like they were diabetics, like that was their life. And I felt like my son's childhood was over. And I really was very pleasantly surprised to learn how far things had come, even as of 11 years ago, in terms of the greater flexibility that a person who's living with type 1 can have, so that you didn't even really need to be a diabetic. You could just be a person with diabetes. And I think that the amount that has happened since 11 years ago is truly astounding. I think JDRF has made a big shift in mentality. JDRF was started in this chapter, in fact, 40 years ago by people who raised money and called out to researchers and said, who needs some? And researchers took them up on it. The process is now so much more sophisticated because JDRF works very hard to integrate all knowledge that's being gained by research around the world and put out specific requests for proposals to speed up the process. What don't we know what went wrong in another piece of research, and so we need to do something else, and ask people to do that. So they're no longer just hoping for serendipity to find a cure. They are really trying to coordinate efforts, improve communication among different researchers so no money is wasted on duplication of resources, and look for the holes and what is it that we don't know, and specifically try to encourage the best and brightest researchers to be in diabetes and to go after those answers. So that means that JDRF is encouraging research at the discovery end of the pipeline. I'm sure you've all gotten delighted emails from grandmothers and well-meaning friends that a cure has been discovered, although it's in mice. And we know that that makes it a long way from humans. But that has to happen first. And so discovery research in a lab has to happen. JDRF has funded much of that over the years. But they're really pushing now also to make sure that it's translational development you see up on that slide really means taking it out of the lab and into people. So something starts in mice, it has to go into bigger animals, primates, and finally into humans. Human clinical studies are very expensive because you have to be very far along, and they're very big risk for a company. And so, but JDRF is really trying to make sure that those things happen. And for example, I think when our son was diagnosed, there was something around 4 clinical trials for type 1 diabetes going on that JDRF was funding, and now we have over 50 human clinical trials going on that JDRF has been involved in at some point of the way, if not actively funding now. And one reason I say, if not actively funding now, some things look like such a good idea and the corporation is willing to take it forward themselves, so JDRF, which might have funded part of the earlier work, doesn't have to put out any money and the work is still getting done. That's a great result. Or JDRF can sort of give it 10% of the money they need as a seal of approval that this is well-designed work, and other funders will come in and fund it. That's another really good use of the money we all work so hard to raise. So there's getting compounds into human clinical trials is an important piece, but there's another really important step to getting it where you can use it, your families, your friends can use it, and that is getting it through the FDA approval and getting it paid for, and getting doctors to understand how to prescribe it and who would benefit from it. And JDRF has been involved in all those things, again, because those are the things that slow down our cure. Those are the things that slow down progress. If it takes 8 years to get through the FDA, if you do a study and the FDA says, no, we need a different study, that takes time. If the insurance company won't pay for it, so nobody can get it, that takes time. So JDRF is working at all those levels through government and with payers and even with the FDA to design the right trial so that, again, it's just the best and fastest use of money and the most direct path to type 9. All right, I'm going to skip through this. Hang on a sec. A few main areas that they're working on, really focusing efforts. And these are all in the treat, prevent, and cure. That's sort of the 3 areas. Treat, prevent, and cure. Keep going. Here we go. These are the main areas, and I can talk a little bit about each thing. Can you hear me if I'm standing over here? Artificial pancreas, complications, encapsulation, glucose control, restoration, and prevention. These are sort of all the main areas JDRF has researchers on staff. Just so you understand, JDRF has researchers on staff that's been going for more than 6 months. Oh, you can't hear me? No. Move up to the front. Is that better? Oh my, okay. The artificial pancreas things are on the market. Medtronic actually is the closest at the moment. In Europe already on the market, Medtronic has something that will come out here as the 670G, and it should come out at the end of this calendar year or early next year, which is very tangible. I can reach that. When we were first kind of getting involved in the diabetes world, this was artificial pancreas was a concept, but it was another one of these 10 years away things. Well, and I've been a little, I must say, this is not my most exciting part, but I'm now excited about it because really, can you imagine that in a year, you could be wearing a device that with very little input from you will keep you between 100 and 200 all the time. And that is just like that's a step along the way. Nobody thinks that's perfect. What they're aiming to do is keep you around 120 or 130. But the first version will keep you between 100 and 200 all the time. That would be an A1C of in the sixes, in the mid sixes, if you were between 100 and 200 all the time. First of all, that would mean you would never go low. And that would mean your parents could sleep all night long. And even if you're off at college, I can attest to how that effect works. But that's really exciting. So this first generation, the 670G that will be coming on the market, will require, of course, you to calibrate the CGM at probably once a day or twice a day, putting in your blood sugar to make sure from a finger prick. It will require you to announce to the system that you're about to eat, or announce that you're about to work out, depending on how rigorous your workouts are. And that will help the artificial pancreas keep up. But then the further generations are getting better and better at those things. So that's exciting. Here's one big question I ask. When is it not going to be 2 sites? Because I know my son finds 2 sites to be a little onerous with the ladies. Here's the issue with 1 site, for example. A lot of the CGMs are approved for 7-day usage, and as a matter of fact, we know they last for 21 days and they get better and better after the first few days. But the pump only lasts for 3 days. So you have to change a perfectly good CGM site if you have to change the pump site. So until they can work out something like that. So that will be an improvement, however, in artificial pancreas. Another one and thing that's being looked at is an artificial pancreas that would have 2 substances in it, glucagon or a version of glucagon as well as insulin, because then if you were going too low, it could literally bring you back up, which is just a really much bigger safety mechanism. The holdup on that is, as you probably know from your red glucagon kits, it's a powder with a liquid that you have to mix into it because it's not shelf stable as a liquid. So in order to put it into a pump even for 3 days, it has to be liquid stable, and it's not at the moment. Things that are being worked on. So when you read that the artificial pancreas has been released, announced, whatever, read the fine print, because there is always some. But then getting back to it, as I said, I've been kind of cynical about it, but if my son could be between 100 and 200 all the time, I'd be so happy, and he would wear both sides. I can tell you he would like it. This is an older slide, and I have to say there's a lot going on with complications in terms of repurposing old drugs and making sure people don't have to suffer from diabetic eye disease. But JDRF's focus is on creating, developing, and helping to get all these other tools in the hands of people with type 1, because then you won't develop the complications. So there's really so much exciting stuff going on for making it easier to treat, making it possible to prevent, making intervention possible, and that's what's going to add up to a cure, and that's what we're looking for. Encapsulation. I don't know how many of you have heard about encapsulation before. So as you probably know, diabetes has the 2 problems. Here, the 2 pieces that would have to happen for a cure would be, 1, to replace those insulin-producing cells that you don't have anymore. So you need to have more of those insulin-producing cells, but there's been an islet transplant possible for many years, but the problem is that there's a couple problems. 1, there's not an infinite source of islets to transplant, but 2, the immune system will keep killing them. Every time you put them in, the immune system will kill them. Right now, if you have a kidney transplant, you can actually also get an islet cell transplant, because as long as you're going to take immunosuppressive drugs so that the kidneys won't be killed, then okay, they'll give you islet cells. And that will work for a couple of years, but then you'll need more. So that's not a solution for most people with type 1, because immunosuppressive drugs are way too difficult of a burden. They're worse than type 1. So the encapsulation idea was, what if we could put insulin-producing cells in some kind of protective case and hide them from the immune system, so the immune system could not come and attack them. And so there are several companies that are working on this at the same time. And this is another thing that JDRF really works to make sure that all the eggs are not in one basket. So whenever possible, have several different teams taking slightly different approaches on similar kinds of projects, so that where one is having a problem, another won't. There's a company called ViaCyte in California that now has 12 people enrolled in a clinical trial already testing this. So it's already in human trials. Their encapsulation device looks like a Band-Aid. It looks like a very thin plastic Band-Aid. And it has, but what their process is putting some immature cells that can then be turned into beta cells, insulin-producing cells, by the body. If you are a person who has type 1, your brain is sending signals to your body all the time. We need more beta cells. We need more insulin-producing cells because blood sugar is too high. And so if you have these immature cells in this encapsulation device, they get that signal, and that's what kind of cells they turn into. They're alpha cells, and they turn into beta cells that produce insulin. And that has worked. The great news is that ViaCyte has seen that these immature cells are actually producing insulin in people where they're implanted. They already know from work that JDRF has done with insurance companies and with the FDA that the trials have to show that the insulin cells would work for at least 18 months. Because then it would be worth paying for the whole process. So the idea would be you'd have this little Band-Aid implanted in a love handle. 18 months later, you'd have another one put over here, and they'd take this one out. And but otherwise, this would regulate your blood sugar without you doing anything. It would keep your blood sugars normal because it would give you enough beta cells. The Band-Aid type device, the way it works is it's a very fine mesh. It's too fine for the size of molecule of an attacking autoimmune problem. But it still is, the mesh is big enough to allow nutrients to come in to the cells so that they can vascularize and produce insulin. So, so that's a really exciting thing. Then another thing happened, which is a researcher in Boston named Doug Melton, who is very motivated because he has 2 children with type 1. In fact, he was a different kind of researcher until he had 2 children with type 1, and now he's a very leading diabetes researcher. But he has discovered how to make sort of infinite numbers of islet cells in a lab. That is so huge because then you have a consistent, constant supply of cells that are already making insulin. So I said to my husband, well, how come they don't just put Doug's cells in the Band-Aid and stick it in, and then they don't have to have them, mature and everything? And he said, oh, because all right, there is an answer for that. It has to do with vascularizing, etc. They wouldn't live because they have to first get fed and whatever. There would be nothing to make them stay alive. But then there's a company in Israel called Beta O2 who has another encapsulation technique, and as a matter of fact, their encapsulation technique involves giving occasional squirts of oxygen, but that is what you would need to keep these other cells alive. So a great example of how, having multiple approaches on something ends up being very important and keeping the process going so you don't end up grinding to a halt because of a problem. So when are we going to be able to have this cure? So that's almost like a cure. We call it treatment because you still have type 1, but it's a pretty good life if all you have to do is go in every 18 months and get your encapsulation device changed out. There's a lot to do. That's 10 years away, but it's very exciting that it's going so well and it's in humans. Those human trials, again, very expensive, and everything you do helps with that. Here's a glucose control I'm going to talk about, and you might see up there it says smart insulin, including smart insulin. I don't know if it was only about 6 or 7 years ago, there was a grad student whose thesis project was something about how you could make a kind of an insulin that was only activated if blood sugar was high. And he got his PhD for it. They said, that's great. And then it was going to go on the shelf because he didn't have any money to see if he could commercialize it. And for $2 million, $2 million is how much we could raise at our gala this year if we had a good year. I mean, $2 million is what our chapter raises a year. So every single bake sale you have made $2 million. That helped that project get far enough along that not only was his company bought out for a lot of money by Merck, who is now completely pursuing this, but there are a number of other, in fact, basically every other insulin-making company is now working on their own version of glucose-responsive insulin. And if you think it through, you might say, oh, it's such love for type 1 diabetes that they're doing that, but it's because, of course, it would be fabulous for type 2 diabetes, and that's an immense market. But the idea would be, especially once they kind of got the confidence in it, you could have a shot once a week. And because it would never make you go low, because it would never release insulin if you didn't have high blood sugar, it would just have enough insulin in it to be released every time your blood sugar went up. So that's the goal with that. That's also incredible. That's also like 10 years from now. So, I mean, there's a lot of work to be done in that, but it's very exciting. It's very compelling commercially to a lot of companies, and there are a number of organizations that are working on it. So, your dollars, and if you feel like I've been doing this a long time, your dollars have made a huge difference. There's so much exciting stuff. Let's see. In the area of restoration, so part of the cure is somehow stopping this immune attack. So restoration and prevention are two pieces of a cure. We want to stop this immune attack, and we also want to make sure that a person with type 1 now has enough insulin-producing cells to produce the amount of insulin they need. So we can do each of the pieces separately, or each of the pieces are being worked on separately, but once they start to come together, then that's when we really are approaching a cure. So that's what's really exciting. Scientists are looking at a number, and another thing, this JDRF really encourages this, they're looking at a number of already existing drugs on the market for things like gout, or lupus, or cancer treatments. They're already approved, therefore they're known to be safe enough. Their side effects are known, and they may have they actually may intervene in the process of immune cell destruction and the immune attack, and in the inflammation process that seems to be causing a lot of different autoimmune diseases. So JDRF has a part in making sure a number of things are moving forward that are looking at using existing understanding beta cell inflammation and beta cell death, and using existing drugs that seem to stop that process, because then suddenly you would have the ability to grow more beta cells. Another thing is, it's known that pregnant women, type 1 or not, pregnant women increase their beta cell mass. Presumably they need to be able to make a little more insulin because they're now going, supporting another person. So there is some hormone that we make that encourages our beta cells to replicate. So scientists are working on what is that hormone, what other substances can make more beta cells grow, and that's restoration. Prevention, near and dear to my heart. Prevention, there's two categories. There's primary prevention, which is like the measles, and if you just came to our other session, I'm sorry because this will be a little repetitive, but that would be where everyone, just like with measles, would get a vaccine, which would probably prevent not only type 1 diabetes, but various other autoimmune diseases, because it would probably be an immune system prevention product. But there's also secondary prevention, because we all know that if you have one person in your family with type 1 diabetes or other autoimmune diseases, you are likely to get others. 30% of people with celiac, for example, also have type 1 diabetes. So this is a bigger issue even than just the diabetes community. But there have been a number of ways that have been looked at to identify who is at risk of getting type 1, and how can we identify them before they end up with the dysregulated blood sugars problem. My son William is in a clinical trial. Did I already say this part? Because I just did in the other session. So did I say it? No? Okay. We came to one of these, 7 years ago, and my children got their fingers pricked to test to see if they have the antibodies to go into the TrialNet study. And my daughter did not, but my other son did have the antibodies, and he was 11 at the time. So we did the follow-up, because the first thing that happens is you get your finger pricked again, and they make sure that it's really true. They're looking for one of about 4 antibodies when they do that first prick, and what those antibodies indicate is that some immune process has begun, and furthermore, those 4 antibodies are associated with people who develop type 1 diabetes. It's not linear, it's not like a mathematical guarantee, because some people, when they are diagnosed, have only 1 or none antibodies, and you can have all 4 and not have type 1. But in general, the more of the antibodies you have, the more likely you are to be diagnosed in the next 5 years with type 1. And then we further found out later, my son has 2 antibodies, but one of them is one that's very highly correlated with developing type 1. So he's in a 75% chance of getting it. However, it has now been 7 years or so. So to me, that's very exciting because every day is a day. You know, maybe we can't prevent it forever, but we just think every day is a day that A, he doesn't have to deal with it, and B, his body doesn't have to deal with it. So he is in a clinical trial children's hospital. It's an easy one to do. We go down every 6 months. You know, I don't know I don't know when it's going to stop, but anyway, so I really encourage you to see Dr. Galgani, get your finger pricked, or if you are under 45 years old and you have a child or a sibling with type 1, you are eligible. So don't just think this is for your kids. This can also be for you. So there are a number of things going on, and I think it's a fairly conventional wisdom that there will be a way to prevent before there's a cure, but really it will be on the spectrum, because once we can do an early intervention, then we'll figure out how to reverse, you know, with the later intervention with people who've already been diagnosed. So that's a whole lot of information really fast, but I know this wasn't supposed to be that long. For beautiful centerpieces, I must say, we've gone all out, and you'll see that you have in the middle of your table 3 pages on some of these areas, and please feel free to take those, read them. JDRF.org, the website, has really a ton of great information on all these different areas if you want to read and get a lot more detail. And so I know you just sign up on that website and you get these periodic newsletters, and there's really a ton of information in those. This is where I get a lot of my information from. So I encourage you to follow up with it, because it's pretty exciting. It's pretty exciting after 11 years to come to this retreat and have several sessions where we have choices. Like, my son's had this 11 years, and to improve his care, he's got good care, but he could do several different things, because there's several different directions he could go. He could think about inhalable insulin. He could look at a type 2 drug. He's been using the CGM. You know, that's really exciting that you have some choices and things are better. Oh, I didn't even talk about, he's got a problem of scarring from his pump sites, but there's a new little pump site being released that is, the needles are better, it gets the insulin in faster, and it doesn't scar. And I'm like, oh, that's what we need. You know, I hope in 20 years they'll be saying, oh, can you believe when we used to have these things attached to us, and you had scar tissue, you change them every 3 days. So that will be a fabulous day when we can go, oh, I remember that. So anyway, as I said, so exciting to come to this place and have all these new things that I can hear about, even though I read about this stuff every day. And I hope that you will stay involved, because you do always learn something, and it strengthens our community when we all talk to each other. So thank you for your time today. Make sure you're an advocate for JDRF, make your donation, participate in our fundraising, and think about clinical trials if they are relevant for you, because those are, you know, without you, we can't do it. So thank you so much.